What do you do when your doctor tells you that the baby you're carrying will be born with a rare medical condition with only 50 known cases in the whole world, and your life will never be the same? That's what happened to Lacey and Chris Buchanan, and they join us today. Welcome back, guys.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So the story starts, you guys are excited, you're newly married, and you're expecting your first child. And Lacey, you're watching a television show one day, and you express it as being a God wink, essentially, that God gave you. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I happened to catch part of a show, and it was a father pushing his disabled son in a wheelchair, and apparently his son was, from what I understood, nonverbal, non-mobile, had a lot of extenuating disabilities, and his father would push him in marathons, 26 milers, and he did that so that his son could experience things, and his son loved it, and it touched me. Of course, I was pregnant and had the hormones going, but it touched me just the lengths that a father would go for his son, the love of a parent to their child, and I didn't know yet that I was carrying a child who would have multiple disabilities. So, yeah.
Tell us about that. You actually ended up writing a letter to your unborn child as well, saying, no matter what, I will love you.
Yeah.
Chris, tell me about that day when you found out that baby in Lacey's womb was going to be born with some challenges.
Well, you kind of think about, first beginning where it's our first child. So, and I found I'm going to have a son. And then, you have all these things going in your mind, like what you're already planning his whole life out for the next 20 years. So, whenever we found out that he was going to be born with disabilities, I was myself just kind of like learning, trying to figure out what we're going to do, going from, with no kids to now a child with disabilities, and what kind of outcomes we can be looking out for, and things that I can learn to make sure that he grows up the way he needs to be.
And did you ever cry out to God, Lacey, asking why?
Absolutely. That was probably one of the first questions. Why me? Why my child? Why is this happening to us? Because we were Christians, we were following Christ, and for some reason, it made us feel as if bad things couldn't happen to us or shouldn't happen to us. But yeah, we absolutely asked why.
And so how was it described to you that what would Christian be born with?
We were really told they just didn't know. We were literally handed a list of diagnoses one day and said, don't Google these, but here's what we think it might be. It was a list. They were just guessing. So when he was actually born, he was born with an extremely rare form of cleft lip and palate. So it clefted his mouth, but it also clefted up into his face and reached his eyes. So his eyes are clefted. So they're small and underdeveloped, which left him blind.
And I'm assuming the doctor would have said, you can choose to abort this child. Was that ever an option?
It was never mentioned to us. By the time we even found out that he had issues, he was at the point of viability anyway, just about. But I think our doctors just knew that we loved this child and we wanted him to be okay. More than anything, our biggest concern was let him be okay. Our concern was not what burden is this going to put on us. And so abortion was so far removed from our thoughts that the first time we had heard that, anything about abortion, he was already 3 months old, and it took us by surprise. We were like, that wasn't an option for us. It wasn't even on the table.
So Chris, take me to that day when Christian is born and you see your beautiful little son for the first time.
No, it was a magical moment. Just after, they took him from Lacey, and I got to see him for the first time. I was just shocked about like how beautiful he was and everything. I was so glad that he was here. And that one thing that we were worried about is they were afraid he wasn't going to be able to breathe, because we had a lot of people in the operating room just getting ready to trach him or whatever they needed to do. And he came out screaming that he was alive, and there was no issues like that. It was a great moment as for me as a father. First time seeing him.
And tell us about, again, you had this long list, Lacey, not knowing what Christian was going to be born with. Tell us about what he ended up being born with. His eyes weren't developed.
Yeah, he was born totally blind, which took us by surprise. That was one thing the doctors didn't see on ultrasounds. So he was completely blind. He had this cleft in his mouth that was so wide that he had to have a feeding tube put in by 4 days old. He couldn't take a bottle. He couldn't nurse. He couldn't feed by mouth at all. He had just the feeding tube down his throat for a while, and they said this is a temporary solution. So we got the feeding tube. He had various other things, a right clubbed foot, and just various other things going on that it was just like we weren't expecting so much at once. So it was a heavy load just sat in our laps on the day he was born. We really realized the extent of his birth defects.
Well, we are going to take a quick break, and when we return, I want to talk to both of you about the stress that this put on your marriage. You talk very openly about that in your book, Through the Eyes of Hope. And we're going to meet the man of the hour, Christian, and his younger sidekick, Chandler. Stay with us.